So we're so fortunate to be welcoming our guest today, Mary Cosgrove. Mary and I have a connection from the past, but she's really here because she is the foremost authority on everything project management. Okay, that's not true. She wouldn't say that. But nonetheless, she's here to kind of help us break down this skill set. And she's got a lot of experience that she's going to be able to lean on. And we're so happy that you joined the Hire and Fire podcast. So hello, Mary. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Jeremy. It's a joy to be here.
Absolutely. So you and I met at a former employer, and we've kind of kept in touch, and you came into my mind right away when we wanted to give a specific focus to the project management skill set. And we're going to try for the audience out there to break it down a little incrementally for people that might not get it. And maybe we'll do some geeking out in some specifics for the folks that are in that skill now. So hopefully cover a little bit for everybody. We're also obviously joined by our lovely co-host, Amanda Anderson, which has not been introduced. Hello, Amanda.
Hello.
Amanda's fresh back from Florida with some, I don't even know what you call it, vacation hangover.
Little foggy brain.
Exactly. Well, welcome again, Mary. So first off, you're in the retirement stage now, but you've worked at a lot of different large organizations in a variety of roles, and project management, program management, that was kind of your specialty. Did you do that on purpose, or how did you land in that field way back when you started?
Oh my gosh, it's been over 20 years, and I fell into it from being in marketing management. So I had been in marketing in the first 20 years of my career and ran into someone who specialized in project management. And this is, I kid you not, this is like 22 years ago. And it was Sally Weatherly who started her own firm recruiting project managers to actually be placed at her client sites. She had an unusual and very successful business model. And at that time, I just ran into her after a marketing assignment at US Bank. And she said, after we talked, that just looking at how you handle projects and day-to-day, Mary, you're not a marketing manager, you're a project manager. And she explained to me what it was, and then she asked if I would join her firm, and I did. And I have her to thank for the next 20 years.
Yeah, wow. Okay, so did you take that as a really cool compliment, or a, hey, I thought I was pretty good at this marketing thing?
Oddly enough, marketing has become project management. I mean, there's a hybrid model in place in a lot of PR and ad agencies now, integrated marketing, and it's led a lot of the times by project and program managers, which I thought was kind of the perfect validation that project managers, spring from marketing. And really, marketing managers are project managers.
Man, and are you scratching the itch of Amanda right now?
I'm
nodding.
That is
her forte. So
yeah,
Amanda,
I'm nodding.
Jump in.
That really makes sense now that you say that, because of managing like different campaigns across, different platforms, and especially when you get into really large firms that have very complex marketing campaigns and stuff. That makes total sense now that you say that.
Well, you're the single point of contact, right? If you're an account supervisor, if you're an account manager, if you're in that role right now in a PR and ad agency or a marketing department, you actually are doing project management. And project managers are the single point of contact for efforts, the special efforts that go beyond the day-to-day, a launch. In marketing, you'd call it a launch or a new product introduction or something like that, is to manage that incremental piece of business, because it's above and beyond day to day. So and that's really what a project is.
So to you, was that like a really easy transition, or harder than you thought it would be back then?
It was so natural and it was so fun that I became convinced that I really should have. And if I had had the option 20 years prior to then, I would have probably pursued it right out of college.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Was that not a typical field then when you graduated? That wasn't really a thing?
It wasn't.
Interesting.
And marketing was. Because I went to the University of Minnesota, the School of Journalism, and they frowned on marketing. They were purists. They all wanted to be news people. But, after I tried to pursue journalism and I ended up in marketing instead, I really did love marketing, and I stuck with it in one shape or another for 20 some years.
It just makes so much sense now that you say that, because I mean, you have to think about the end user and user experience and everything in both of those scenarios. And
that's your job. It
yes.
really is. You're representing the business and technical.
Well, look at that, Jeremy. I could be a product.
That's right. We just moved Amanda. She got a new title. I should. Yeah. Now, for you, did you jump straight into specifically information technology project management, or not necessarily right away?
It was a little weird because I had also had an MBA in MIS. I had just completed my MBA, and it was in the management of information systems. So I started out on a marketing project of all things, and then I moved into more. I went back to actually being a full-time person for the city of Brooklyn Park. I directed all their communications and technology. So it was a hybrid role. And during that time, I became more and more aligned with the technical side and more interested in it. So starting at about 2006, I became a technical project manager, and most of the time stayed on that side, but then ventured over to the business side as needed, and then moved more into program management as well. So back and forth and up and down, just as required by the client. So it's a really flexible role depending on client needs and the size of the project.
Yeah. Well, later I'll try and we'll cliffhang it a little bit, but I'd love to get your opinion at some point about if you were an aspiring project manager, how to get into that, if you were to do it today based on what you know. I'm sure a lot of people would love to hear that. It's also very comforting just in the fact that our show's on the hiring and firing and the staffing business and just jobs in general, that so many different skills overlap. And I think a lot of people undervalue the fact that their skills in their present job could be very analogous to something completely different, and they might be very unaware of that, maybe even pleasantly surprised how valuable their current skill set might be in a different area, just like you found out.
Absolutely. And I find it not only to be a pleasant surprise, but it can make or break your whole career. It can put you in a position financially, or just with a more flexible schedule, maybe a flexible workplace, give you the kind of autonomy that you've really been craving all this time, and you may not have even realized it. You step into it and realize that, oh my gosh, my skills are transferable. I fit in this environment. I'm getting paid better than I was ever paid anywhere else. I mean, what's not to love?
No doubt. No doubt. Well, I would love to continue to dive into your experience, and I hope that we do. I think it'll naturally, organically come up as we keep going. But if you don't mind, from your perspective, can you give us a little bit just of an overview of the skill set, maybe the different titles that are maybe the most cliche or typical in that area, kind of how you would define them, just for folks that either don't know or might be pleasantly surprised by learning more about these titles?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. Well, first off, we have, and I can go from kind of I'm not going to say the bottom up, but kind of more entry level and moving up. And then just bear in mind that all these positions interact, and one can become the other depending on the size of the project. So let's say we have a business analyst, and sometimes even a business systems analyst. They gather requirements for a project, and they communicate clearly from the business to the technical side, to the sponsors, to the owners, what those requirements are, and they get agreement on those requirements before you ever reach the next step and before you ever implement a thing. So that business analyst has similar skill sets to the next step, and that's a project manager. A project manager typically has larger scope, so you are the single point of contact in any given project. And a project is a discrete piece of business. It can be large, it can be small, but it's not day to day. It's not doing a patch, it's not doing an upgrade, it's not hiring and firing. It really is focusing on a key piece of business that needs to get implemented and working a 360-degree perspective across the business and the technical side with all resources on the project. Everything has to filter through that person, and that person owns everything. And at the same time, they have little influence, right? They have some influence, they have a ton of responsibility and a ton of ownership.
Would you
Now,
say?
if you're
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
go ahead. That's okay.
I was just going to ask, for a project manager's sake, is that where the cycle starts? So, for example, if an organization was going to kick off a project, whatever it might be, building a new website or developing a new product, or like you said, it could be any particular aspect of the business. Does the whole process, obviously after things maybe were funded, does it tend to start with the hiring of project managers? Or do you see the BAs getting involved first, and then once the requirements are gathered, then they tend to bring in PMs that can help manage it from there? How do you see that?
A lot of times they bring in a PM and a BA at the same time, depending on the size of the project. And the first step really is when the business says, hey, we have a need, and then we have to define that need. And then they work kind of across the aisle with their technical partners to define the need further. And it's at that point they tend to put in a requisition for a project manager. And at the same time, if it's big enough, you really are going to need a business analyst or a business systems analyst, and sometimes more than one of them. And then the project manager will come on, and she'll start working with the business owner. So you have defined already a project sponsor, someone who's going to run with the funding and support the mission of the project. They're typically at a very high level, usually within 3 or 4 levels of the CEO of a major organization like a Wells Fargo or a U.S. bank. And that person is going to work with the business sponsors, and those people are going to work with the product owners and the business owners. And then you're going to have their counterparts on the technical side. And they all agree that it's time to bring in a project manager who's going to pull together different aspects of the project to tee it up. So work with that business analyst to define the requirements, and at the same time start identifying key resources across the enterprise, people who should be part of that project and who should take a day-to-day interest and be involved in either promoting it or actively shaping and delivering that project. And that can be different technical teams. It can be different business units, technical or solely business. And it can span the globe depending on the size of the project. But the project manager is going to come in and tee it up with different documents and getting buy-in on those documents on what's our purpose. What's our goal here? What's in scope? What's out of scope? Do we have the funding? How are we going to resource this? Who's going to push this forward? Who do we escalate things to if things go wrong? Who's going to resolve it if there's a dispute? What's our dispute process? How are we going to identify and manage risks? Who's going to be with us from the legal team and from the risk management team so that we don't get into difficulty? That you identify risks, like you had mentioned earlier, Jeremy, security risks. And those tend to be identified early on in a project. You have to call out what's called showstoppers, things that could derail your project in a heartbeat. And then assign a level of likelihood. How likely is this thing going to derail my project?
Sure.
And then rank those. And so that's part that the project manager has to be involved in from the get-go. So they should be involved early on, and they should partner with both the business and the technical sides. And they should get in and start building those relationships and identifying who's going to be involved and work with that business analyst. And hopefully at that point, they've identified the next party, who's the project coordinator, who supports all aspects of that project.
And would you mind breaking that down a little bit? And here's why I ask. I've always enjoyed these skill sets because I view them in 2 different buckets. I kind of put project coordinators in if it's more on the entry level end of the spectrum, they're more of an administrative assistant to the project coordinator, to the project manager, at least in my mind. Then if they're more on the senior level of a project coordinator, I almost more treat them as a junior level project manager. Is that accurate? Am I being too generic, or how would you describe that?
I think that's spot on.
Oh, okay, good.
There you go, dear.
So there, win.
Yeah, there we go. Simple as that. So you and I were laughing because you had mentioned you had a project towards the end of your career where basically everything was getting cut, right? You were either losing resources or whatnot. And you mentioned taking on the project coordinator duties, and you kind of just threw in there that meant you were responsible for the financials now. And I remember instantly being confused, because I just didn't put the financial budget management on the project coordinator's plate, just in my own brain. Is it always that way, or what's the most typical, or how would you describe that?
It's typical, but it's not always that way. A project coordinator can be, as you say, more of an admin. But, I mean, we now are leveraging project coordinators to do tons of things to help support project managers, because as we all know, particularly in technology, there's a huge labor shortage. Mm-hmm. So we can't forklift enough bodies on. And project coordinators get to pick and choose, the projects that they're going to be on. So you hope and pray for a project coordinator who has good financial capability, who's comfortable with Excel as a spreadsheet with the advanced workbook functions, but who can also do things like get in and out of PowerPoint. Give decks and presentations to the team as a whole, and sometimes senior leadership. And the other piece, which is at a Wells Fargo or a U.S. bank, the project coordinators own a couple of things. One is the project plan, using MS Project typically, but other tools are also applicable, and advanced use of Excel. So for financial workbook functions, and setting it up so that anybody can go in there and identify what the project coordinator is reporting on. So I'll track of resources, and a project manager does all this stuff too. If you don't know how to do it, then you can't judge whether your project coordinator is doing a good job.
For sure. So
you're
For
helpless.
Sure. You have to have a quite broad skill set, from being able to talk technically to your developers and programmers, but then also on the financial side as well.
Yes, and you live and die on the financial side. We had a guy who I love. I just love this guy, and I think he's still a project manager, so I'll never ever let on who it is. It was a major project at a major bank, and I think they had the CCIVR portion of it. So their phone systems, basically, upgrading them. And it was multi-million-dollar effort. And I would tell you that he had to forecast his budget. And in forecasting, you say, okay, next month we're going to have $200,000 go out to this vendor. Well, the vendor didn't bill us. And he just said, well, I'll take that out of my budget then. No. Push it forward a month, because you haven't paid them yet. Mm-hmm. So what that did is it reduced his forecast by $200,000. And then he did it again with several other things. So he was over actually reporting, hey, I've got a $2 million budget. No, you actually are going to be over by $1 million, because you're going to spend $3 million.
And I'm going to assume that's a bad thing, Mary.
That was terrible. Yeah. It's just terrible.
So you would like to be on time and on budget, if at all possible.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yes.
Okay.
And project managers own that. Either they do head count, but you have to put in a spreadsheet, okay, I have these resources at this hourly rate, and they're forecasting that they're going to bill this many hours, and this is what they actually build. So you have to go to a fine detailed level of actually going in and verifying what they build in the system, and then total that up and report on it at minimum every month, and then explain why you're off by 5% or more. Mm-hmm. Have a good explanation. Like, well, he was on vacation, so he's going to be billing that next week. We're going to have the same total number of hours over the next 6 months. He's just pushing it forward a week. Mm-hmm. So a project coordinator should have those skills too.
And I like what you said about project coordinators in a labor market like this, where it might be tough to find the right people, or in theory, if you're bringing in the right level project coordinators, if you're struggling to find PMs, you could maybe bring in 1.5 or maybe even 2 senior project coordinators that could potentially handle something similar.
Yes.
There's
some very skilled project coordinators.
I agree.
And one of the companies that did the best job that I've ever seen with project coordinators was Thrivent. and this is years ago, so I can be candid about this, but they knew how to take a project coordinator who really had a project management background, and they paid them very well, and they delivered the project, and they worked for really who would be identified as a program manager now. So you see how the vernacular changes. It just depends on how big is the project.
Sure.
What does the company prefer? What does the client prefer on titles and duties? But essentially, people in a project coordinator role were delivering project management duties.
That's a really important point, right? We make the joke internally about a few of our clients, because of their levels, will have titles like technical analyst level 9, where from the outside, what the hell does that mean, right?
Exactly.
But they know exactly what that means. But it's really important advice to people out there that you're describing, because at a company like Thrivent back in the day, you might have the title project coordinator, but you could and probably should be a project manager at a different organization, just because of how they kind of allocated the responsibilities. And you might be almost underselling yourself by calling yourself a project coordinator elsewhere. Kind of one of those funny things, just like those big companies that have too many VPs, right?
Mm-hmm.
They kind of cheapen the title a little bit, right? Okay, so
director.
Yeah. So from a program management perspective, or a program manager, are you automatically either the project manager's boss or a higher level than a project manager, or is that a way oversimplification?
No, I think you're spot on again. See, you're not bad at this.
God, I hope so, right? No, that's great. Because I think for a lot of folks, that title can be misleading. Because just because you're a program manager doesn't necessarily mean that you are leading a team of project managers any more than so from your experience, when does a company start using program level folks or that title, or is it kind of just depend on how internally that customer ranks pay grades, for an example?
It really is client specific. So Wells Fargo may do it differently than U.S. Bank, and U.S. Bank may do it differently than Thrivent. Thrivent does it differently than Ameriprise. But essentially, a program manager, if you're a purist, they're managing multiple work streams that may or may not have multiple project managers. They might be using, as you pointed out, a project coordinator, business systems analyst, business analysts, and other contractors, as well as full-time resources. So a program manager is not a glorified project manager. They're at a higher level. They have oversight for more, and they tend to have more responsibility and greater scope in general. They're called to account.
Does that tend to be the almost automatic career pathing plan? Do you find that most project managers are aspiring program managers, or do you?
No.
Okay, you do not. Okay, why would you say that?
They don't. If you like being a project manager, you can be one for your whole career. And if you've been there 20 years, if you're full-time, let's say, they might try to reward you by calling you a portfolio manager or a program manager, but essentially you're still doing the same job.
Mm-hmm.
You own multiple work streams, and you work with contractors, or you might not work with contractors. And really, as a contractor, it's just a great career path because it's so flexible, and you can take on more, you can take on less. It can be driven by the size of the project or the team or the type of project. So it's very flexible.
Yeah, and with this economy that we're in, we're starting to see some organizations, obviously we've been seeing this for a while, where they're starting to spend more and hire more. We have a government client here locally that is starting to bring in project managers, and we know that means that the money is starting to be spent. They are ready. They're ready to get going on something. Frankly, in this case that I'm referencing, they don't even know what it is yet. They're almost preemptively hiring project managers. How would you feel if you were a project manager in the middle of your career and you were being hired preemptively to be one without having a assigned project? Would that be exciting, or would that be a turnoff to you?
It depends on the project manager, but you have to be really comfortable with ambiguity as a project manager, because you get into a brand new situation every time you take on a new project. there are so many unknowns on the front end of every project. So if you need everything completely spelled out, then you're probably not good material for project management.
Noted.
If you're excited at the prospect of new and different things and how you can just pull it all together, because that's really going to be your job, is to identify all these pieces and to pull them together and to get validation. And this is what we want to do, and this is who we want to do it with, and this is when and how we're going to do it, and this is how much it's going to cost. And that's really the purview of a project manager. So I was always excited by just being thrown into something. I really enjoyed that.
I can relate a little bit to what you're saying there about the ambiguity, because like I mentioned, my son's father is a product owner, and that was one of the things that he says is you don't know exactly what the end product will be, and so you need people who can work through ambiguity of, like, every week he would meet with the stakeholders and decide on the next product feature and what was going to happen, and you kind of had to be comfortable in that kind of murky area.
Yes.
When do you find that it's important to use a project manager versus a product or manager or product owner? Because I know that they're funded a little bit differently from my experience.
That's correct. They are funded differently, and they also have significantly functionally different roles, where a project manager will pull everything together, and the product manager will probably have a more narrow focus. So it's product specific, right? Where that product may be part of a suite of products that are related to each other, or that are part of a specific business unit. When you look at credit cards, and you have different kinds of branded credit cards and debit cards and other preferred credit cards, and they're all part of a card payment system business unit at one of the financial services companies. And so one product owner may have specific oversight for a card or a suite of cards, but the project manager, and I'll give you one example, is I helped pull together Visa checkout for a major financial services company here not too long ago. And I worked with all of the product owners and the product managers, and also the business program manager and the business product manager, and then the technical side, so that we could enable Visa checkout on their online banking and money movement systems.
Interesting. So in that capacity, you might have been running a project on your own to, say, roll out a new credit card, and then you therefore are going to have a product owner that will be assigned to that particular credit card in that instance moving forward. Once that project is rolled out, you kind of move on to the next one, but that owner will remain there to continue to own the product moving forward.
And they do, they continue to hone work with the bugs and make more features, and they own it, and they work with the stakeholders.
It's a BAU, right? Business as usual process. So once you go into implementation and you launch, then your project is done. You'll go through probably a 3 to 6 month period where you pull everything together and make sure it's all finalized and pay all the bills. But ultimately, you shut down. And the team in place from the business side, and sometimes from the technical side as well, they continue their business as usual process. And that's what is so great about project managers, is because you go in and there's this bell curve. You whoop up and then down and then out. And then you do the same for every project. So it's quick up, way up, start to come down, and then you end. You go off the ski jump.
Sure.
And that seems to be the reason why so many project managers, program managers, et cetera, become so flexible to do contract-based work, because that's almost the nature of the beast, regardless of being permanent employee or a contractor. Because if you're permanent, you're rolling into something new, or you may have a few projects at a time. So your role itself always has kind of a starting something new or wrapping something up, whether you're permanent or contract. So at that point, I assume, and maybe you'll agree or disagree, it's just a personal preference of whether you would rather stay in one organization and keep bouncing from project to project or go to other organizations and do the same thing. Do you view it that simply?
I do.
Okay.
I'm in 100% agreement.
Yeah.
And they're different personality types, right? People who like a little more predictability will stick with a company, and they'll get to know all the owners on the inside, and they'll have that influence, and they're well respected, well regarded, and they're great subject matter experts. And that's something we project managers and program managers rely on for a living. These subject matter experts who can point us in the right direction on the inside.
So how did you feel about that when you were doing contract work versus when you've been perm? Did you view being a new contract-based project manager as a little bit of an uphill climb where you didn't know the folks internally? And did you view that as, is that fun because you get to meet people, or do you feel like you're at a little bit of a disadvantage without knowing all of the stakeholders for years and years, as an example?
You know, it's really fun. At least for me, it's really fun. And my husband has told me he could never do it. You know, he likes a more predictable environment. He likes to know everybody and know what he does every day. And I'm more like, please just throw me into it.
Yeah.
So you have to be the person who's okay with ambiguity, and at the same time where you can structure it. You know, you're going to build around it, and you're going to push it forward, and you're going to have a system and a process, and you're going to adhere to the system and process that particular client uses. And you're agnostic, right, to any system or process. You adopt what they adopt within reason, and you just have to be malleable. So that's the fun part to me. And in terms of not being the expert, when you come in and listen and you rely on the expertise of other people and you pull that together and you kind of feed it back to them, and if you do your job, in 3 to 4 months, you become the person they're relying on. And you actually become indispensable because you're getting up to speed on their system and how this product or service will integrate with their system, and who are the key players. You know them by then. You know where the core knowledge resides. You're leveraging all those variables and you're pulling it together, and they respect you. And you get to the 90-day period and you're still confused as a contractor, you probably shouldn't be a contractor.
Fair enough.
I hate to say it.
Reassess your choices.
It's good. It's good advice. Here, how about this one? I'll change gears on you a little bit and run the risk of just pissing you right off. Ready?
Oh, no.
Okay. I love this component, and I know people hate it. Why is it that most BAs and PMs think that they can BA and PM anything, yet the industry doesn't tend to treat them that way? Do you think that the BA, you're right? So most folks really do, if they have a good tenure in either skill set, business analyst, project manager, program manager, etc., they really believe in their skills to be malleable and jump in and just throw it at me. Let's roll. Hey, if I've been rolling out new software for the last 5 years, what's stopping me from rolling out a new telephony system, to your point earlier? But the industry itself, and maybe you can blame my industry for the love of God, that, most of these folks tend to be pigeonholed based on the types of projects that they've done or the industries that they've specialized in. If there was a group that was right, is one of them more right than the other, or how do you view that debate?
Oh my gosh. I mean, that's a tough question because I think there is a bias in the industry. No matter where you go, that you will get pigeonholed if you stay there long enough. But right now we're in a wonderful economy where contractors and full-time people can pretty much call the shot. I mean, you're in charge.
Completely agree.
So, now is the time. If you want to try something new. And I took this attitude from a recruiting perspective with a friend who shall remain unnamed, but she's retiring soon. And she was a single mom, 3 kids, dire financial circumstances, and she had gone back to college and got her degree in her 50s. She was about to lose her home. She was working at Target, really had a tough time financially, and I tried to convince her to come into be a project coordinator, and she was afraid. But I said, you've been in admin, you've been this, you've been in sales, you've got all the directly comparable skills. What's going on here? And she said, but I don't fit this mold. And I said, we're going to fit you in it, right? We're going to take those skills, we're going to put them in your resume, we're going to work with a recruiter, and we're going to get you a job. And then you'll be experienced. You'll have 6 months, you'll have a year, all of a sudden you've got experience. Well, that was 10 years ago. And she went from $22 an hour, I won't say the client, but it's a financial services company in downtown Minneapolis. And she worked overtime, routine overtime for a year and a half that she was on that project, and that was the max that you could be on it. Well, after that, she was able to go to another project. She went from 22 to $40 an hour. Then she went to 60. So she's now, I mean, easily she gets $70, $80 an hour. Is that a happy person?
I would imagine so.
And I just said the door is open. The door is open now. You can run through it, but it'll close at any time, so run now.
Yeah, Amanda and I covered this on a show recently, and there's a few dynamics that you brought up because I completely agree with you, and I'm going to turn it over to Amanda for the second part. But I completely agree with you on the notion that this is the time. If companies are struggling to find people, there's never been a better time to stretch to the skill set above you, whether that's a title or what have you. Because when they're struggling to find people, it's when they're employers, that is, it's when they're most likely to be more understanding about somebody quote unquote underqualified. If the market's tight, which no one's rooting for because it's going to take another recession to get there, now it's the opposite. You have an abundance of candidates, and obviously the clients are going to become more choosy just because they have the luxury of doing so. So I agree. I don't care what skill set you're in. If you're a junior lawyer and you want to become a partner, this is your chance to make a run for it. If you're a systems engineer and you want to become a DevOps cloud engineer or whatever the next step is for you, this is your time to stretch. And I agree with another part of what you said. Utilize staffing organizations like Pirate Consulting because we can help you with these things, right? How to frame up your resume, how to use your titles to your advantage, which we could get into later. But more importantly about your story, and this is where I'll give it to Amanda, we went into the component of how different men and women can be in regards to what jobs they'll go for and whether or not they'll stretch. Do you remember this, Amanda, by any chance? Because there was basically a stat that said, don't quote me on this, but it's close. Most men out there will apply for a job if they fit, say, 50% of the characteristics. But most women are much more pessimistic than that.
It's up to 90% that we require.
Yeah, most women don't even apply unless unless they deem themselves having 90% of the qualifications.
And I can relate to that personally.
That pisses Amanda right off, because A, this is a moment to strike, and B, go for it, because just like your friend's example, you may have transferable skills that you're not giving yourself credit for per se.
And it's all how you put it on your resume too, because I think too often we put our resume in just, chronological order, and this is what we did in this industry, and we're not highlighting the actual skills. So when you were talking about that young woman who had all the skills that were transferable, I loved that, Mary, because it was that sang to my heart, because that is something that we do not do enough of, specifically as women, but as just a workforce in general. And I think that it should be a paradigm switch of what we should really be doing, is looking at, like you said even earlier, a marketing person can be a project manager. Like we have the transferable skills. It's just a title change. But I think this industry right now, or the market is the perfect time to take those transferable skills, modify your resume, and take the opportunity to maybe go into different industries as a project manager. Of like, maybe you are being pigeonholed, modify that resume and go into something new and starting to broaden what people view you as capable of.
And use and abuse us staffing companies. If you're in that spot, reach out to a few of them, explain what you're trying to do, and get feedback. You might find 2 of the 4 recruiters really don't give you the time of day. Okay, well, the other 2 will. And they're going to be able to help you get your resume pretty, or give you an example of either a type of job or a client that may be most likely to hire somebody like you. Male, female is irrelevant in this category, because it's just flat out true. So if I twist it a little bit and we go back to my question from earlier, how do you feel about industry experience, specific technical experience? Do you like the fact that maybe your strong financial services background meant that you could get those jobs better, but not others? Or how do you feel about it? What did you experience? Were you able to easily move into another organization that has nothing to do with moving money? Or how do you feel about those skill sets and industry experience and whatnot?
I think that's a really good question. And really, it depends on your drive and the need in the marketplace. And I found that my skills were not only readily transferable, but I was able to go over to different types of businesses. So in financial services, you have an 18-month max where a contractor can be in place. They have to take a 6-month break. And now it's up to 2 years at some of the companies. But during my 6-month break, you'd want to take another project, but you wanted to be a short project. So I jumped from a financial services company that had problems with the budget, and I knew they weren't going to get the budget approved. So I reached out to a recruiter, and that recruiter placed me at Jack Link's, of all things, beef jerky.
Beef jerky, that's right up your alley, Mary. I mean, financial services and beef jerky are exactly synonymous.
That's fantastic.
And it was so fun. I mean, everybody at Jack Link's was just a joy to work with. They were all just committed to the job. And the CFO would take me on tour of the building and talk to me about the different plants and their business models. And their senior leadership was hands-on, so they'd come in and just get to know everybody. And the best advice I got was show up early and talk to everybody. And I did. And I felt like, hey, I'm part of the group here. And I left because I went back to my old financial services organization when they re-upped. But I just was able to go back and forth, and I had fun with that.
What do you attribute that to, that you were able to go back and forth?
Well, I had a good recruiter, number one. I think recruiters, they can rock your universe. They can just make everything better. And the best thing that we can do is take the advice of your recruiter when they give you feedback on your resume. And you really, I'm a writer, and you're probably a writer too, Amanda, by trade, where you come into marketing and you have to be an excellent writer and be a published writer. Well, you own your writing, and you have to be open to other people correcting it, because they know that business. And they also know these automated systems that search for keywords. And so if they say, change it, use these words, follow their direction. They know their client. They know how to get you in the door. Yeah. They have someone in mind.
And an unusual thing that a lot of recruiters don't get credit for is we just look at resumes 10 hours a day.
Yeah.
So we know exactly what works and what doesn't. A lot of folks just make simple mistakes of not being willing to change titles just because it may be underselling them, or I suppose even in rare occasions overselling them. And just yesterday, ironically, my brother, who's a senior manager at Comcast out in Colorado, sent me his resume, and his resume is great. He's been promoted multiple times inside of the organization. He's earned it all on his own. I didn't change a darn word of his job descriptions, but I used my gifts, which are editing, and I made that thing very, very pretty and aesthetically pleasing to the eyes. Just very clear lines, and everything is aligned properly and spaced properly. And those weird little tricks that recruiters know are not something most people know. Because Mary, you are clear. You've proven already how much you know about your skill set without a shadow of a doubt, but you're not a professional resume writer and would never claim to be. So
no.
Even
and
if
I trust recruiters,
right, but even though even at the end of your career, when you'd been doing it by that time for decades, there are still recruiters out there that could be half your age that could genuinely help with just some little tweaks like that. So definitely lean on recruiters for sure when it comes to resumes.
And be humble, right? Be humble that someone can know something that we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have a question?
Well, I was just going to agree with that. That's something that I've learned just in marketing. I managed a team of 24 or so young marketers, and I got results through others because they were all specialized in different areas. And so I think no matter the industry, you have to have that mindset of, your stuff, but someone else knows theirs. And so use them for those skills for sure.
Yes. So, and develop relationships with them, right? Mm-hmm. I've always advised people that don't insult your recruiter. Don't have the attitude, that you do this for me. Why aren't you doing this? And it really is this person that's helping you find a job, frankly. They can be valuable to you for years.
Well, networking in general. I mean, I can relate to that currently of, some of my past employees, all on good terms, and still when I need something, whether we contract them for something, this or that, I've still got the relationship. And I think in general, people undervalue that networking and maintaining and building relationships with people.
It's so valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, anecdotally from my experience, contractors or job seekers that are open to working with staffing companies tend to either reach out or welcome calls and emails from 5, 6, 7, 8 of them. Maybe schedule a phone call or an in-person meeting with 2 or 3 or 4 of them. And then from there, they're kind of letting the chips fall. They're willing to work with a few different organizations. And then normally they have one they're either rooting for or would prefer to work with. So even if you have an established connection with a few, great. Continue to keep in touch and then also reach out to others. No matter how awesome we think we can be at times, we don't have direct connections with every employer in any market that we're in. So to a certain extent, like it or not, you kind of have to at least have a little bit of a stable of folks that you're willing to keep in touch with, and they can definitely help you. And if you're running into some of those pitfalls that I was mentioning earlier, if you're a financial services guru and nobody will give you the time of the day in another industry, then start utilizing recruiters as a way to potentially work around that or to diversify your experience if you feel like it's costing you. Then again, if your niche, let's say yours is financial services, then that could be your best bet to capitalize on either your experience or your pay rate or getting a job as quickly as you would want if you're in that spot. So, but I bring it up because in my whole career, it's just been that same theme of I can BA anything, and I believe them, but that's not what we as recruiters experience. There's scrutinization of resumes internally to staffing companies, who gets sold to the client and who doesn't. A lot of times our client will arbitrarily add into job descriptions, hey, we would really love a project manager with X number of years of industry experience. Sometimes that can be very legitimate and that is a minimum requirement, and other times it doesn't have to be. So feel free and use recruiters for that reason too. What would your advice be to somebody who's trying to get into the field? Do you have anything from go to school for this or start here or is it just as simple as figure out a way to get into a project coordinator role because that's kind of your way to start?
I think going in as a project coordinator is one of the best ways to start because, it's a lower bar. It does pay a little less, but it still pays well. And you get exposure to the industry in that setting. So if you already have those transferable skills, you work with Excel, you work with PowerPoint, you're great with Word, you're great at coordinating different things. You like working with people. You take notes. You save those notes. You're accustomed to setting up distribution lists and you're great at SharePoint. You already understand cloud storage and those basic concepts. Then you're in a position to get a project coordinator position. And I would work with a recruiter on that. However, if you want to take that next step and go into project management, and I was already in marketing and I had the writing background and the technical background, but I took a full suite of courses through Project Management Institute, so PMI.org.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they were great. So the one, I think, drawback about PMI.org is that they heavily sell certification and they heavily sell their courses. Now, there are other courses you can take at community colleges that are cheaper. And if you're a senior in the state of Minnesota, a lot of those courses are free at community colleges. So if you're looking at a career transition or you just want to beef up your skills, you're already in the industry. But for those who are entering the industry, take a course at a community college. It's cheaper. You get a full overview of what project management's all about. They'll give you information on next steps, and chances are you might get an MS Project license out of the deal. That MS Project is an expensive tool. And back when I started, it was like $800 for a license.
Yeah.
And I mean, we use that in and out, and the clients will have it and you will not have to pay for it once you're working. But if you get it as part of a course, that's really nice.
Yeah, and valuable, of course. Yeah, PMI, from my perspective, is one of the few certification locations, shall I call it, that has done a good job of continuing to keep their certification just as valuable as it used to be. So, for example, Cisco certifications has done a good job as well on the networking side of our business. But an example on the other end of the spectrum is Microsoft. Their certifications in general just got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, where they were doling them out to everybody. So it became borderline irrelevant and not really valuable. But the PMI, specifically the PMP, the project manager professional, is still really, really valuable. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe to get a PMP, you have to have a certain number of hours documented of experience professionally before they'll even allow. Okay. So you can't necessarily go get a PMP right out of the gate. But to your point, if you were trying to get into this, you took maybe an MS Project course, you worked with some recruiters to make your resume pretty, you got that first shot at a project coordinator, just a couple of years later, you would have enough hours under your belt to be able to at least be in a position to take that test to become project management certified.
Exactly.
Yeah, excellent.
And in the interim, you can market the skills that you have, and you can retool your resume, and you can be submitted for assistant project manager roles.
Oh, sure.
Would you say there's a difference between a senior project coordinator and an assistant project manager, or are they just very analogous like we talked about before?
I think they are analogous.
Yeah, so it depends. And this is a goofy one for somebody coming up in the skill. You could even look at your own resume, anything from program manager, project manager, technical project manager, project coordinator. A lot of those titles are very, very analogous, and BAs are the same way: business analyst, technical analyst, systems analyst. So it can get confusing, but that is another good reason to reach out to a recruiter, because we can help you with simple things like how to utilize titles to your advantage based on what you want to do next.
Spot on.
Excellent. Well, Mary, I can't appreciate you enough for your time. I learned a lot today. Clearly, you know exactly what you're talking about, so I appreciate that very much. We're going to put some information about Mary into the show notes associated with this show once it's published, to make sure that you can learn more about her, and then we'll make her as available to you as she wishes, whether that be a lot or a little. But congrats on a really cool career. I personally had a great experience. You know, you and I worked together, but just in the same company. We weren't exactly close, but I'm happy that we met, and I can't thank you enough for your time today. And obviously, I hope you continue to thrive in your compound in St. Louis.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure reconnecting. And awesome. Amanda, nice to meet you.
So nice to meet you. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mary. Have a great day. I hope we talk soon. Thank you for listening to the Hire Fire podcast, brought to you by Pirate Consulting. Check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or online at piraconsulting.com. That's PIRA consulting.com.